Good evening, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you all have had a happy Thursday, and we are almost through the work week and the trading week. So, kudos to everybody for making it through this work week coming off of the Thanksgiving holiday. And we are going to be talking about European weather tonight, but I just want to give a quick reminder, and then we're going to go into a little bit of a, I guess, winter weather classroom session before we then dive into some European content. The survey, for those of you folks that are subscribed to Energy Rogue, the survey for WX Rogue is still live. So if you haven't had the chance to fill that out, head on over to the Discord server under Weather Rogue. There is a link for that. Brian, thank you a million times over for posting that survey once more. For those of you that have not filled that out, that feedback is really important to us and for myself to have sort of a guiding point on how we can continue to improve the weather product moving forward. So once again, if you haven't had the chance to fill it out, please take the opportunity to do so. It should only take you no more than 5 to 10 minutes, and it has much to do with this website, but also to do with the content that I put out on a weekly basis. What are some things that I can improve? What are some things that we don't typically talk about or show on this website that you feel would be beneficial for us to cover? All of that can be submitted through that survey. Now, second thing, leading to the classroom session I alluded to, before we truly dive into the European weather discussion, I wanted to revisit a question that Cash, you had posted in the Weather Rogue Discord server. And by the way, thank you for your questions. Greatly appreciate it. And as a matter of fact, as I'm thinking about it in real time, what I would like to do is let's actually look at tropical tidbits here. So we'll head over to the GFS, for example. And I did have Europe pulled up, but again, since we're kind of calling an audible here, let's just head on over to North America, and we will look at the 500 millibar chart. So for context, Cash had asked a question about the Arctic Oscillation, or the AO, right? And wanted to know some clarification on a comment that I made about how cold air is transported from the poles all the way south into the United States. Well, if we take this picture conceptually, this map of North America, you see all these little blue circles here, right? Or these blue splotches. These are what we call circumpolar lows. Now, these low pressure systems circulate counterclockwise about the North Pole. And so they are constantly rotating about the North Pole counterclockwise throughout the year. Now, as we get closer to winter, which now we are fully within the winter season, we do tend to see, because we have less daylight and less heating during the afternoons, more of that cold air transporting south. So how does that happen, right? How do we get cold air from the poles, these circumpolar lows, to move south, and even as far south as the southern United States? Well, it takes competing air pressure. So we just mentioned low pressure. They circulate around the poles. Well, what's an air mass that counteracts low pressure? It'd be high pressure. And so that high pressure helps to dislodge that cold air south. Let's use this map as an example. So here is a cold air mass that has moved south across much of New England, the Northeast, and the Mid-Atlantic. Well, this same low pressure originated from the northern provinces of Canada, which we'll actually draw here in pink as a reference. How that low pressure goes from circulating counterclockwise around the poles to rather diving southeast equatorward is by this high pressure that's located in California. And think of that high pressure as Floyd Mayweather punching in the air, right? Or even, let's just say, punching his opponent. Well, what is the opponent's reaction going to be when he gets punched? Of course he's going to flinch, right? Of course there's going to be some sort of reaction to that blow, right? So dialing that back to weather, think of high pressure as a Floyd Mayweather or a Conor McGregor punch in the Arctic, right? Or towards the Arctic. That mechanism causes low pressure to be dislodged and then dive south and southeast across the lower 48. So Cash, I hope that answers your question, and I hope you appreciated the UFC boxing reference there, but that's really the best way to describe it. Now, let's actually contrast that though. Let's say if we didn't have this high pressure here, and rather than high pressure in the western United States, what if it was over the Midwest, right? Or what if it was even in the southeast? Well, in that case, we wouldn't be seeing low pressure diving south across the United States. And instead, we would just continue to see these circumpolar lows circulate about the North Pole axis. So, in short, how we get cold air to be displaced from Canada and latitudinally northward all the way down to the southern United States and really lower 48 is by the processes that take place in the Pacific and even in our neck of the woods, such as where high pressure is placed relative to those low pressure systems. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of this repetition with our cold air across the Northeast, the Midwest, and New England, and why I continue to forecast for that to continue into December and into January, because La Nina actually favors high pressure continuously meandering around the Pacific and the West Coast. And that in of itself leads to continuous cold air advection as far south as the Midwest, Northeast, and New England. That, folks, is my weather lesson for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any additional clarifying questions, feel free to let me know. And now, what a perfect segue to go into European weather, because you are seeing quite the opposite across Europe. And it feels like we haven't talked about Europe in a while, and I do apologize for my European friends here. You know who you are. It has been, we had the holiday season, and video uploads got a little bit disrupted with the travel that I had, but I've been meaning and dying to get this content out to you. So let's talk about Europe, and we're going to jump right into the 2-meter temperature anomalies. And we are going to be using the EPS tonight, which is the European Ensemble. Now, remember, folks, when we're using an ensemble, the reason why we use it is to just give us an idea of the pattern trend. These temperatures are smoothed out, right? So these shouldn't be, your de facto numbers that we should be really harping on. Don't get too hung up on the Celsius output here, but rather the pattern itself. Because remember, these ensembles are taking an average of 20 to 30 different members. And as a result, any temperature extremes that exist within that spread of the data would get smoothed out. And for those folks that are statistics, junkies like I am, you know why that's the case. That's kind of one of the downsides of taking the mean of a larger data set. It does tend to smooth out those extremes, which has its pros and cons. But we want to use this just as a gauge for what to expect moving forward. And I have to say, over the last 72 hours or so, really the last few days, we have seen well above normal temperatures across much of Western Europe. That even extends as far north into Sweden and Finland, believe it or not, and well above normal temperatures if we're really hardcore about tracking Russian weather. Weather across central Russia and even east of Moscow, we're seeing some well above normal temperatures for those folks as well. Really, the only below normal temperatures we've seen as of late, and really just the last few days, has been places around Turkey, and then even getting back towards, some portions of Israel, Jordan, as well as, some of portions of northern Africa even. So it's really been a mild regime, and for those folks that have been monitoring my forecast on the European side, I have been calling for above normal temperatures for much of Western Europe throughout this winter season, and then of course Eastern Europe seeing more of those below normal temperatures. And I have to say, based on the latest run from the EPS, which we'll take a look at right now, it looks to be more of the same, right? We see by the time we get to this Friday, a continuation of those above normal temperatures. We have nice flow, westerly flow coming off the northern Atlantic, which is bringing some of those mild temperatures to places like Portugal, Spain, and even up towards France and Germany. Seeing, again, more of the same when it comes down to this unseasonably warm condition, right? So that is just playing into the narrative still. Now, the exception to the rule would be parts of northern England that are seeing some of those below normal temperatures later on this work week, and especially as we extend into this weekend. But look what happens here as we get to early next week. We do see a bit of a shift here, only for a short period of time, well below normal temperatures for much of Western Europe, and then a continuation of the above normal for places like Ukraine, as well as Russia, and then even extending back towards the Mediterranean as well, with some of those above normals. But this is very short-lived, ladies and gentlemen, because as we go beyond Wednesday and really into what would be next weekend, that cold air is gone. We see mostly normal temperatures, and then once again above normal for Eastern Europe as that really continues throughout the middle part of December. And if we go even farther out towards, really getting closer to Christmas, we still see those above normal temperatures for Western Europe. Now, the one thing that's really interesting to me, and I think where my weather prediction is going to be wrong for Europe, is actually about Eastern Europe. We are seeing a lot of model guidance that points to above normals for much of Eastern Europe. And by the way, as I mentioned to start things off tonight, I was really forecasting for a below normal season for you folks. And according to the EPS and even our other ensembles, if we even take a look here at the GFS ensemble, for the most part, not as bullish on the warm temperatures, but still, nonetheless, this is a pretty mild temperature regime across pretty much all of Europe throughout the central part of the month or the middle of the month, and even extending into the latter half of December. Now, for my folks that track European weather that are wondering, are you going to make a change to your prediction? Or even the second question, what does your forecast look like for Europe as we head into even like late January, February? In my personal opinion, considering what we're seeing with the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, considering what we're seeing now, as well as what's happening in the United States, I would make the argument that we are actually going to be seeing mostly what we're seeing in the middle of December extend throughout January and February. So I am making right now an adjustment to my forecast. I typically don't like doing it, but if I feel that trends are not going in the direction that I once thought, I will sort of call a mulligan, and I'm going to do that tonight. So the only change I'm going to make is for Eastern Europe. Before I was forecasting for below normal temperatures, I am now calling for an above normal season for Eastern Europe. And my forecast for Western Europe as far as above normal temperatures for you folks, that is not changing. I am keeping that the same. I was expecting more of a progressive pattern to where, hey, if Western Europe is warm, I would think that we would see more of these below normal temperatures existing throughout Eastern Europe, and again, extending as far east as Belarus and Ukraine. That's just not the case right now. And so long as we continue to see the pattern that we do in the United States, which is bringing a lot of that cold air across the Midwest and the Northeast, well, that, of course, can lead to an on-ramp of upper-level high pressure out in the northern Atlantic, which really doesn't leave much room for those below normal temperatures across Eastern Europe that may even extend much further east this season. So just to clarify, just to really wrap this up into a bow, I am making a seasonal forecast change adjustment for specifically Eastern Europe, where I am now no longer calling for a below normal temperature winter. I am now calling for an above normal season. So mild to above normal, most the same for Western Europe. And by the way, this isn't just because of what I'm seeing here in the immediate short term. This is from what I've seen and observed the last few weeks, as well as current ensemble trends that go beyond the next couple of months. And actually, I am curious. I do want to look here at the climate models themselves since I brought it up. I want to look at the CFS and see what they have for 2-meter temperature anomalies. Let's see, January, February, March. Gosh, look how bearish that is. That's crazy. Now, I know the CFS typically, and what I've observed is it does tend to have a bit of a warm bias, but it's definitely pushing the envelope there. And let's see if the CAN SIPS is also on board. Yeah, I mean, and I would tend to agree. By the way, it's funny because here I'm making that prediction. I didn't even look at the climate models yet, and it's pretty much validating my own thought process here. So this really is going to be a tale of two seasons, I think. We are going to see a much different winter in Europe than we do in the United States. But if we go down to the micro of the United States, it really is even a tale between two winters between the northern and the southern half of the U.S. I continue to predict and forecast the southern United States will still remain mostly above normal to mild as well, whereas the northern United States, Midwest, Northeast, and New England will be below normal. I have a below normal temperature winter. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm not going to show it on the screen here, but actually, you know what? I will. Let's call another audible. Let's go over to the COD website and let's look here at the CFS model, right? This, by the way, is not surface temperature. This is 850, so it's not technically at the surface, about a kilometer off the ground. But that's not, don't get hung up on that. The whole purpose of me showing you this is because look at what happens over these next couple of weeks, right? The CFS continues, despite, some mild sort of reprieves that are mixed in throughout, kind of this next week or so for the Midwest and Northeast, still continues to hint at these cold barrages that show up for the northern United States. But again, look at the South. I mean, aside from maybe some freezing episodic periods, it's mostly mild. But these areas that we continue to monitor are very La Nina-like. This is what we would expect in a traditional La Nina, something that we haven't seen in the last few years. Why I show you this map, though, really has nothing to do with continuing to push the envelope on the cold weather forecast, but rather the other storyline that you have to watch. The lower Great Lakes have seen substantial lake effect snowfall, and they continue to see lake effect snowfall tonight. I know we don't talk about that much. We're so focused on temperature, but why I bring that up is because if we continue, and I expect to see these continuations of cold air following behind just blast after blast after blast as we head into January. If that is indeed the case, then that would mean that cold air that's advected across the lakes, that just means continuous lake effect snowfall. We're not done. And eastern Ontario, Erie, Pennsylvania, Buffalo, New York, Rochester, even up towards Grand Rapids, Marquette, Michigan. These are areas that have seen already astronomically high snowfall totals, and I would argue climatologically above even their standard this early in the season. This usually is technically the start of lake effect season. You have lake effect snow until your lakes freeze over, and sometimes they don't completely freeze over, especially in some of the eastern Great Lakes that have a much higher depth content. But, my point here is just the sheer amount of lake effect snowfall that has been produced in the early part of the lake effect snow season has just been astounding. And it's been something that we really haven't seen in probably even the last couple of years, especially for even the lower Great Lakes, or the upper Great Lakes, I should say. And that's important because keep in mind, right, when we have a lot of snowfall that accumulates, and if we are to see exactly what I expect, then that snowfall creates an increase in the snowfall pack. And when you have a good snowfall depth, meaning you got a lot of snowfall accumulating on top of old snowfall, the incoming solar radiation from our sun, right? Here's our sun. It's going to reflect radiation off the ground or off the snow. And because of snow's albedo, meaning how much it absorbs versus reflects back, is then going to be reflected back up into the atmosphere above it, and thus actually enhance colder temperatures. So some of these temperatures that are being outputted are not necessarily taking that into account. It's only taking into account the air temperature itself. These temperatures across the Great Lakes could even be colder than what's outputted, especially if we see more of this lake effect snowfall regime continue over these next several weeks. Listen, thank you guys so much for your continued support. If you have any questions, post a comment down below in the YouTube video. Be sure to leave a like. And for my folks over on Energy Rogue, if you have any questions there, you know where to find me. Weather Rogue Discord channel within the Energy Rogue server. And don't forget, fill out that survey. It'd mean a whole lot. Appreciate your feedback. Have a great rest of your night. Have a wonderful weekend. And we will be back, believe it or not, this weekend with another weather video. Take care.